You know what's funnier than Jimmy Kimmel and Conan O'Brien and other late night comedians? It's when people like Sam Shamoon and other Christians like him think they're scholars of Islam, when in reality they have no idea how to do research on, well, anything, and they completely cherry pick. The same thing that are, and they're inconsistent. Uh, uh, the same, the same inconsistency they accuse a fellow Muslim apologist like me of being. So basically, there's this article by Sam Shamoon. I'm going to post it below, where he talks about how there's no evidence for this pre-Islamic prophet, these pre-Islamic Arab prophets Saleh and Hud. And the stories of Saleh and Hud are found in the Quran, chapter 7, verse 73 to 78, and the Quran, chapter 11. And then he says that the Quran takes, he repeats the same arguments that the Quran takes stories from previous people or tales of the ancients, etc. And he cites the Quran chapter 68 verse 15 and the Quran chapter 83 verse 13. Well, like I said before, Islam does not claim to bring everything new with it, so it's no surprise that you can find, pre-Islamic stories, pre-Islamic Jewish, Christian, Arab stories into the Quran. Because the Prophet Muhammad, keep in mind, the Prophet Muhammad said he's not something original among the messengers. Quran chapter 46, verse 9. So the Prophet Muhammad and Islam don't claim to bring everything, every story and every practice new with it. There could be pre-Islamic elements or pre-Islamic stories which are true, and Islam is coming to confirm their veracity or their truthfulness. But anyways, I want to talk about the pre-Islamic mentions of Hud, Saleh, Ad, and Dawood. Basically, these stories aren't found in the Old Testament, but if you read the Book of Genesis, there is mention of somebody named Saleh, and there's a mention of someone named Hud. Uh, for example, I'm reading from this Bible. So if we go to Genesis, if we go to Genesis, if you go to the book of Genesis, okay, if we go to the book of Genesis, chapter 10, verses 21. I'm sorry, Genesis chapter 10, verse 24. It talks about Salah. It says Aper Haxad, and again I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name, was the father of Saleh, and then it mentions Hud somewhere. I believe it mentions Hud somewhere. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Getha, and Meshhesh. Uh, yeah, so basically, it does talk about Saleh. So Saleh is mentioned in the book of Genesis, chapter 10, verse 24, but we don't hear much about. We don't hear anything more about Saleh. So basically, there was some pre-Islamic biblical notion of a figure named Saleh, but anyways, I wanna talk about how there were pre-Islamic mentions of Hud, Saleh, Ad, and Dawood, because some critics of Islam, like Sam Shamoon, and other primarily Christian critics or researchers of Islam and atheist critics, etc., will say the Prophet Muhammad made up the story of Hud, Saleh, Ad, and Dawood, and these are bizarre stories that came into the Quran, and that's completely false. This is why I say they're not qualified to talk about these things, because they're ignorant and they don't know how to do research, because these are pre-Islamic stories. So let's talk about the chronological events. Where does Hud and Saleh fit in to the historical continuum, or where do they fit in the world timeline? According to the History of al-Tabari, Volume 2, page 28 to 47, it says that Hud, Saleh, Ad, and Talmud would have been between the time of Noah and Abraham, so after Noah and before Abraham. Okay, so let's get into the pre-Islamic mentions of these people. I want to try to keep this video as short as possible. The pre-Islamic poet Umayy bin Salt tells the story of Saleh in the she camel. So basically, there was a miracle of Prophet Saleh where a rock exited a rock gave birth to a pregnant she camel, and that she camel walked among the north of among the pre-Islamic North Arabs, and this is found in a book called Diwat Umayy, page 44, and then H. Braun, Encyclopedia of Islam, Umayy. So what about Hud? Hud was considered an important prophet by the pre-Islamic Arabs. Hud was considered an important prophet by the Hadrami Arabs, and in the book Hadrami al-Hijr, pages 132 to 133. English translation would be pages 78 to 80. And again, I'll be leaving all the references below. The traditions of Saleh are linked to al-Hijr in Central Arabia, also known as Mada'in Salih or Saleh cities. See Winnett and Reed, Ancient Records, page 37 to 39, page 42 to 54, page 130 to 132. We also have pre-Islamic inscriptions that point to Hud. And again, I'm going to post the reference below because it's a very long reference. And then there is also archaeological evidence that supports a pre-Islamic origin of the Hud traditions. For example, there was the tomb of Hud, which is near the border of Oman and South Yemen. The Tomb of Hud was a regional shrine. It's a long reference, but see below for the exact reference. And finally, in the history of al-Tabari, al-Tabari records that prophets of Hud and Saleh were famous among the pre-Islamic Arabs. For the reference, see the History of al-Tabari, Volume 2, pages 46 to 47. So basically, there was pre-Islamic. The stories of Hud and Saleh were of pre-Islamic origin, and they were famous amongst the pre-Islamic Arabs. But their stories didn't find their way into the Old Testament. But there were still oral stories about them, and there was inscriptions about them, and there were poetry going around about them, whether oral or written. So that's basically it for this video. The stories of Hud, Saleh, Ad, and Talmud were not made up by the Prophet Muhammad, because we find pre-Islamic evidence for them. As for Ad and Talmud, again, the pre-Islamic poet Umayy actually does speak about them. And the pre-Islamic Arabs didn't know about them. Again, found in Diwat, pages 44, and C.H. Braun, Encyclopedia of Islam, Umayy, etc., etc. So basically, there were pre-Islamic stories and sources about Saleh, Hud, Ad, and Talmud. Stay tuned, a lot more videos are up ahead.